We are back, and it's our 50th episode. So,
blimey.
Yeah, guess what we're going to talk about on our 50th episode? Is it going to be an amazing topic on like real well-known ones like the moral argument? Is it going to be on hell, open theism, praetorism, biblical criticism?
Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism?
That's right. Is it going to be any of those? No, it's going to be a really, 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 really different one. And it's all going to be about hand washing. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, no pun intended, and I am going to wash my hands of this one. Ed?
Okay. I'm going to pick it up and drop it. Francis, off you go.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, there's some interesting stuff about hygiene in the Bible, because for a long time, for thousands of years, in fact, more than thousands of years, people didn't really know a lot about hygiene, but obviously God did, because he knows everything. So you might think, mightn't you, that there would be some really good advice in the Bible about how to do things hygienically, how to stop the spread of disease. There's quite a lot in Leviticus, which is quite interesting or amusing, depending on your point of view. And I think we're now going to have a reading of part of Leviticus. Listeners might be well advised to have one of those paper bags that you get in aeroplanes in case it all gets a bit choppy. But yeah, sure. So shall we hear a bit from Leviticus chapter 13? I think we're going to start at verse 18.
If there is in the skin of one's body a boil and it heals, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling or a reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if it appears deeper than the skin and its hair has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease that has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it and there is no white hair in it, and it's not deeper than the skin, but is faded, then the priest shall put him up 7 days. And if it spreads in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease.
Hope nobody was eating a meal while they were listening to that. But there's much more of it in Leviticus in the same vein.
Yes, I did mean to say shut him up 7 days. Yeah.
So when you told me about this one, Francis, I asked you how much that would actually be a way of identifying a communicable disease rather than just a sort of boil that will sort itself out.
Well, it's quite tricky to know the answer to that, because as all the biblical commentary sites are very quick to point out, the word that is translated there as leprosy or leprous doesn't necessarily mean specifically what we would call the medical condition of leprosy, or as it's now called, Hansen's disease. They will all say, oh, well, this was just generally about any kind of contagious skin disease. But at the same time, they also say, well, they had to be really, because as it goes through, one of the things you do is once you've decided that it definitely is leprosy, then these people have to go and live by themselves. It's really, and they have to go around with a bell saying unclean, unclean. So, not sort of a very humane and happy state of affairs. But yes, I mean, what they argue is that it would have encompassed a number of conditions, which would have included leprosy. Well, I did look up Hansen's disease, and the way it's diagnosed, the symptoms can vary a lot between different people. But I didn't see anything about white hairs or, sticking out of the boils. And the other thing about Hansen's disease is that it's actually quite difficult to contract. It is contagious, but you can't contract it very easily. And also it takes a long time to develop. So some of the advice is that you monitor somebody for 7 days, and then if at the end of 7 days it's spread, it's like, whoa, right, okay, now you're out of it. Now you're out of the community. Go away and sit somewhere completely by yourself, and don't come near us unless you've got one of those bells and you're shouting unclean. But that doesn't really seem to be necessary. And you think that God might have been able to give them a nudge as to what was necessary and what wasn't necessary. And it all, to me, reads a bit like the reaction in the 1980s to AIDS, where it was based on ignorance. I mean, in a way, it was understandable. It was frightening that you had this disease that it just seemed to be a death sentence, and everybody reacted by, whoa, don't let them anywhere near you. Don't share your cutlery. Don't hug them. Don't kiss them. Not even a peck on the cheek. Real fear based on ignorance, and a lot of this reads to me like ignorance. And I think perhaps the point that's worth making about that chapter of Leviticus is that it starts off, God said to Moses. So this isn't just like general advice that the elders have come up with. This is health advice direct from God.
So this is purporting to be a practical advice.
Yes.
Sent from God.
Yes. The practical advice of an omniscient being who cares about the people to whom he's giving advice and wants, wishes for their welfare.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it moves on to mould or something, which you quite enjoyed. It's like the difference between wet rot and dry rot or something like that.
Yes. So are we going to do a reading for that, or are we going to take a clip?
I think
from...
it drifts on into the subsequent chapters, chapter 14,
right.
And you get this wonderful kind of hocus pocus scarlet yarns and dipping dead birds in clay, or the blood of the dead bird in a clay pot and sprinkle it 7 times and all sorts of stuff. And then you have to release the live bird, and there's something else in the open fields outside the town. This is all towards the end of chapter 14.
I think, didn't you find a podcast? A theist podcast that actually thought that this was rather impressive.
Yes,
Ed.
I did. Yes. Would you be happy for me to play it out?
Yeah, maybe not all of it, but the sort of relevant bit where they say, well, isn't this great?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll put a link in the show notes. It's called the Bible podcast, Bible podcast.
The whole word.
All right. Yeah.
Podcast.
So,
I think that's what I've.
Yes, here it is. Yeah, whole word, as in not word podcast. Okay, so this is what he says about these passages in Leviticus.
Diseases and defiling molds. So once again, we have more on skin diseases and mold abatement and various health considerations. I mentioned in the last chapter that Israel was ahead of its time by thousands of years in terms of the things that would protect them from sickness and the spread of diseases. So there was a health aspect to this, and of course there was a ceremonial aspect to this involving guilt offerings and sacrifices and so forth for all of these procedures. These regulations were both ceremonial and health related. Once again, we had 2.5 to 3 million people living in close quarters. In the ancient world, bacteria was unknown. Personal hygiene, as far as how it related to health, was virtually unknown. The implications of mold were certainly unknown, really, only becoming known in the last 40 or 50 years or so. But here we are 3,500 years ago with the Lord giving procedures for how to deal with mold in houses and mold in clothes, how to do mold abatement. And then if the mold was there, of course, there were health implications that the common people were not aware of as far as science was concerned, but God knew. So, Lord, we thank you once again for all of these details. Lord, you're the God of the micro and the macro. You are concerned about the big picture in our lives and these small details that affect our lives. Thank you, Lord, for protecting your people and for watching over us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yes. It's wow.
Yeah. Nobody knew about it. But do you know who could have told them about it?
Yeah.
Well, you know,
So-
an omniscient being could have told them about it if he was, you
The
know,
same,
in the habit of communicating with them.
The same person that Ken Ham says, we know someone who was there at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yahweh. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I remember in church years and years ago, and I don't know why I was struck by it, but it did strike me. And the preacher was talking about laws in the Old Testament and the prohibition around eating pork. And he reminded us of the old saying that you shouldn't eat pork if there's an R in the month. Have you heard of that one?
No.
I have. Yes, I have. Although more commonly with oysters. I know that you're not supposed to eat pork pink, or you used not to, although I think there's now a theory that you can eat pork pink. But anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, pork is considered, I think with tapeworms and things, a slightly more dodgy meat than lamb and beef. And so that he was saying the same sort of thing, really, that sort of God knew all those years ago, and is out of his love for people gave us this warning. And
yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that the warning was on pork and on shellfish, which, to be fair, we do know carry health implications, but I think that's possibly a rather simplistic and limited view of these restrictions, which were really, I think, more what's the word I'm looking for, more kind of religious and ritualized, because Jewish people also weren't allowed to eat their horses. Well, you know, there's no suggestion that horse meat, although it's, you know, culturally not something that we in the UK like to eat, there's no suggestion that horse meat is bad for you. And they're also not allowed to eat shark. Well, as far as I know, there's no particular problem, no health problem related with eating shark. So I think people are tending to project on these ritualistic exclusions modern knowledge about health, which I think wasn't an issue for the 7th century BC people.
yeah. What I'm trying to do here is sort of chop off the objection to what we're going to be saying, which is basically, if there was this, you know, good God behind all of this, why isn't there good practical advice? Because when it suits them, they say, "Oh, how brilliant this advice is," like we heard on that podcast and my preacher memories. So what I'd like us to do is to concentrate on hand washing, because it is such a key issue. There's a Wikipedia page on hand washing, and it says how particularly child mortality, it can be greatly reduced by hand washing with soap, and it's just about 50% reduction in diarrhea diseases, which are obviously massive ones, and even respiratory ones as well. So that this is a really big deal. If people just started washing before handling food with soap and water, you'd have a massive impact on child mortality. And of course, that's what we've seen over the last few decades as charities like WaterAid have got stuck in, and it's a whole UN emphasis, which has been tremendously successful. Obviously, with other measures, child mortality has halved in the last 30 years or so, or something like that. So the kind of idea here is that, okay, God is considered to be good and loving, if he is a good and loving God, he would provide practical advice to stop disease, particularly for children, when it was kind of easy to implement. I'm saying God hasn't done that. We'll get into the details of that. And therefore, you can sort of say from all of that a God doesn't exist, or a God of the description good and loving doesn't exist. So that I had a kind of chat with Francis about this yesterday, and you feel that trying to make it into a kind of clear syllogism almost obscures matters rather than highlights them. What?
Yes, I felt that it's easier to see it as just like a more. So I suppose not so much the logical problem of evil as the forget what the alternative is, the abductive problem of evil. That it's just not what you would expect.
Yeah.
From a loving God.
Yeah. So if you were kind of speaking to the jury as a lawyer, you wouldn't go for syllogisms. You'd just sort of set it out and.
No. Yes, that's right. You'd be like more members of the jury. The defendant says that they cared for their child and looked after their child, but members of the jury consider this evidence. The child had 15 broken bones when when they were brought into hospital. Does that sound like a child that was cared for and loved?
Yeah. So the kind of, if you go for this kind of argument with a Christian, their kind of instant reaction would be, well, come on, that's silly. The Bible's a spiritual and moral book, not a practical manual for any practical things.
Well, I mean, how did anyone ever put that argument to you when you were a believer? And if so, how did you react? Or did you just never have that conversation?
I can't remember having that conversation. I remember being a bit troubled by the passage we're going to come on to in Mark's Gospel, but I don't remember anyone trying that argument on me.
I think it depends on what strand of Christianity you're from, because if you're in a highly charismatic Pentecostal church where healing is part of your church, you tend to think of particularly, physical healing, like bodily stuff, is very much part of the teaching that God wants this, and if you've got these things, then it's not God's will, and all the rest of it, which really flies in the face of a lot of actual textual stuff. But I think, but in many ways, but if you're taking that view, at least it brings it out of just the purely moral, and because it would often be linked to, isn't it, that immoral stuff brings you these things. In those churches, it would be from the dark side. You're opening yourself up to the devil, as it were, and so these things need to be healed or cast out. But it still is the physical. But in other churches who don't operate like that, then it's much more spiritualized, I suppose.
Yeah, but just because it is all spiritualized and we're used to that, it doesn't stop us asking, well, hang on a minute, why isn't there practical advice? And as I said before, we were concentrating on all this brilliance of how the mould thing was before its age in the scientific understanding we now have, and all that sort of thing. That people do leap on it and say and think God would give us good practical advice when they think he has.
Andrew, didn't you have a cartoon type meme where God is saying that he's going to go down to earth, as Jesus, and all his divine counsel saying, "Oh, that's a great idea. You could tell them all about germ theory."
Yes, I did. Non-stamp collector, that's called that YouTube channel. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Yes, it's the same guy that does the angel by the side of the Lord, who's more wise than Yahweh, pointing out these things. It's in the same context of those kind of cartoon ways of communicating. But it's like, so you're going to go down then and tell them about things? No, I won't do that for another few thousand years, and I won't even do it then. They'll find it out by themselves. but that's right. It does point out the fact that whenever you've got, for us who are struggling to learn and learn by science bit by bit and correct ourselves as we find out more stuff, that's one way we've got here. But if you've got a God that actually knew it all at the press of a button, at the right time in each era, even of the Black Death or anything, you could just say the things to who you claim to be able to hear you. Do this, you know. So my thoughts would be anything in the Bible that happens to tally with what's really good, maybe getting clean or hand washing or soap. The fact that humanity has gone on way before the people that wrote the Bible, they would have discovered these things anyway. And so it would be some good things would creep into the Bible and some ignorant things would creep into the Bible. It's, to me, it makes sense as a human thing again, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's clearly they were aware of disease and they were aware of the idea that diseases could be contagious and that you needed to find some way of not coming into contact with the disease through diseased people or through the things that diseased people had touched. But then it all goes a bit, you know, a bit sort of Pete Tong when you start having hyssop and red thread and birds and
There is a lot of practical advice in the Old Testament, in the laws that, you know, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, all the rest of it. But actually, there isn't any reference to washing hands at all around food or anything. There is a bit. There's 4 references to washing your hands. But they're all around ceremonies. So sacrifice, you know, before you sacrifice the bull to God, or in setting up the altar, or those sorts of things. They are nothing to do with everyday life. This is just for the priests to have to sort of be clean before God. But there is one reference to rinsing, which is a rare word, the word translated into rinsing, which is weaker than washing. But as far as I understand it, soap isn't implied even in washing in these Old Testament law references to like washing your hands before sacrificing. So that there is this one reference to rinsing, and that is in relation to when you have someone who has an unclean discharge, and all around that. So it's this actually looks like this is just the sort of thing that God would be doing for us. So this is actually the next chapter, Leviticus chapter 15 now. And it starts by talking about when any man has an unusual bodily discharge, such a discharge is unclean. So that's in the first verse of the chapter, you know, of this whole new section. And then it talks about all sorts of ins and outs and this and that about cleanliness from this. And there's this one mention of washing your hands, well, rinsing them rather, around this person who sort of might well be unclean, and just heaps about washing clothes and this, that, and the other. There's all sorts of other stuff going on. And missing the key point, which is all about washing hands, you would have thought.
Or in terms of the diseases you could catch from objects, boiling them. I mean, never mind about poking around in the boils on people's bodies. I mean, how about just boiling, the boiling clothing and I mean, so much disease and illness could have been prevented by that very basic advice on sterilizing stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose it raises other questions, doesn't it, about the whole context of the Bible and what's being said here? Because, I brought this up before because a lot of discussions are automatically assuming, I think you had mentioned, Ed, about it's a reflection on God and what he's like, isn't it? It could have, there's so much.
Well, if you make the leap that this is God speaking.
That's right.
The simple answer is God's nothing to do with this.
Yes,
even
yeah.
if God exists.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just we're discovering stuff, if you think about the way that science has gone in terms of medical bloodletting and stuff, 150 years ago, whatever it was, all these things that radically changed now to be seen. They would think they were doing the good thing. It could have had a book there that said, do not do this sort of thing or whatever. But I always come at it from another angle. The fact is, it's not so much, there's so many passages in the Old Testament in which we're reading this context of cleanliness or maybe ceremonial uncleanliness and whatever that means. But you've actually also got God who does, it's not so much that he hasn't given you information to stay away from getting boils and sores and all these diseases. He's actually doing it. It struck me when I was reading your writing about this. I was just suddenly thought, well, here's some verses sort of in like Deuteronomy 28, the Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt and with tumors, festering sores and itch. From you it cannot be cured. The Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, and confusion. So this is not so much God saying, I'm putting stuff in the text to help you not get boils and tumors. He will actually bring those in terms of the way it's written because of your behavior. And so, but then again, there's another verse which was like the opposite of that, just to show you that worship the Lord your God, I've got in Exodus, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you. If not, I'll bring every kind of sickness and disaster not recorded in the book of law on you. And so it's like, do you see what I mean? It's not so much that God is always there, could have given us better information to help us. The assumption is he wants us all to be healthy, but it's all in the context of obedience, isn't it? And then punishment.
So what you're saying is that, or what God is saying is that good hygiene and practical advice is completely irrelevant because it's up to me whether you're healthy or
it's up to him in how he responds to how you behave. So in fact, matter of fact, the way not to get boils is by behaving well and following the covenant. And that's the way not to get boils, not necessarily to follow these informations of washing your hands. Otherwise, you would say, okay, I'm going to give you sores. But we're going to wash our hands, so you can't.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, I think the context really is disease and illness and sickness seem to be coming from God based on behavior. Good behavior, good following the covenant. You will not have these things. Bad behavior, from my point of view, disaster will come upon you, which is boils and sickness and all of these things. So really, I think the context is so different from like a practical manual anyway. Do you see the point? That's really the point. Yeah.
Although, this procedure that the priest was supposed to go through does sound like
a practical,
practical help. I mean, it's not practical because it's mainly nonsense. But,
yes,
but there's an attempt there just to have some hygiene rules, and they don't comply with how we would set up hygiene rules because the people who write them didn't have the information that we have or the understanding that we have of how to achieve good hygiene. But you can see that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to achieve good hygiene. They do understand. They have some idea of that. The people, the 7th century BC, they weren't stupid. They just didn't have our levels of knowledge,
Yeah, and they weren't in the Bronze Age either.
No,
that made the point.
In the Bronze Age, they were stupid.
Yes.
By the time they got to the 7th century, yeah.
But I tend to think that Neanderthals back in their day were probably just doing their best with the information they had. So,
I suspect everybody.
The world is reasonable to be very flat at a certain point of understanding in the human timescale. Until we knew more. They weren't stupid to think it was flat. At the point,
I mean, it seemed like
it looked like it. Common sense, actually.
Yeah,
but common sense isn't the way often reality is it? And so it's much more complex. So nobody's really stupid here. It's just that it just shows the human element of the context of the time. Yeah, and I think Francis is probably right. That other one about the adultery test. I mean, that's not so much health, but that does read like a little practical thing. Right, we can check if you are.
With the bitter water.
With the bitter water. And so we'll go through this, then you throw the dust and you do this and you do that. And if, of course, your womb does this, then we know that, of course, I mean, it's just nonsense. But I'm sure they thought this was a fair way of doing things back then, at least in that writer's mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Writers,
yeah.
of course, different writers. So.
But what's funny is my one that I picked up with a man with the unusual bodily discharge,
Yeah.
which sounds like we're all about public health. Actually, as the chapter goes on, you're also made unclean by an emission of semen.
Yeah.
A woman in her monthly period.
Yeah.
And for a man who has sexual relations with a woman who is ceremonial unclean.
Gosh.
So it's all over the place.
So that means that pretty much everybody you've probably got there.
Speak for yourself, man.
Yeah, that's right. You made me laugh when you said that thing. I can imagine someone coming up. Are you the man with the unusual discharge? Everyone's talking about you. What is it? Oh, dear.
Okay, so let's put the Bronze Age even further behind us.
Yes.
And talk about Jesus and the hint that we've already discussed that, when finally God turns up on earth and he'll sort it all out for us.
Yeah.
Now, the key passage is Mark chapter 7. Of course, there are the same passages in some of the other synoptics, but Mark is they're copying from him, as we all know. And so let's have a dive at it. So this is Mark chapter 7 and pretty well the whole chapter. And I'll kind of set the scene and we'll take it from there. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law had come down from Jerusalem, and they kind of had it in for Jesus because Jesus' disciples were eating food with hands that were defiled. So basically, they weren't. The Pharisees were upset that the disciples weren't washing their hands properly before eating. And Mark says to us, because of we're Gentiles, he's writing to Gentiles. He says, all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the traditions of the elders. And this is sort of Francis territory, because if you look it up, that is actually the case. Judaism does have the ceremonial washing before eating, particularly with eating bread. And so we can see that actually the Pharisees and their traditions were actually better than the Old Testament, which certainly doesn't have, as we've said, doesn't have anything about washing your hands before meals. So I think that's quite interesting as the background here.
Yeah.
So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands? Now, what do you think Jesus' response should be to all of this?
Because
if we know what's coming.
Well, I know what it. I know what it was.
Okay, what was it?
Well, it was that what defiles you is what's inside your body already, not what you put in your body.
Well, it's even worse than that. He says, you've let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And he said, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. So
really interesting.
It's not just that's irrelevant, you shouldn't be bothering with that. He's saying you are actually doing something wrong. You're setting aside some commands of God to be washing your hands before meals.
Meaning that they weren't commands of God to do that. It's just a tradition.
Yeah, so holding these traditions, it isn't just a kind of silly aside. It is actually going against. You're somehow being sinful, to use the Christian word.
It's. I suppose I might see that as a little bit Pauline, that by following the law, you were actually moving away from God.
No,
there
he's
anything in that?
saying,
No, it's the
Jesus is
opposite.
saying that you're setting aside the commands of God. So you're not following the actual genuine law.
It more sounds like Matthew, doesn't it, when he says that not one least of the jot or tittle of the law it shall be broken. It sounds like traditions have come up outside of the law, and they're paying attention to traditions that aren't from him. Is that what it sounds like? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That
Yeah,
you should be obeying the law, not this new tradition stuff that's been added on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and your point would be, of course, is that the tradition is actually getting closer to healthiness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still not soapy water, but it's washing your hands.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, that's an insider. It's never ever occurred to me at all. Gosh.
Yeah. Great. So then Francis' stuff that she was talking about with it's not what goes into the heart or into the mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out.
Yeah.
So Jesus says nothing outside of a person can defile them by going into them, which I think the World Health Organization might have a little bit of trouble with. He says, don't you see that nothing that enters a person from outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach and then out of their body. So obviously a Christian will be saying, look, you're making a complete meal of this. That's not what this passage is all about. It's not trying to speak about hand washing. So why do you kind of make it that way? But if somehow God is behind this, or Jesus is God, and God's omniscient, they should jolly well know that they're completely playing with fire.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think?
You're stretching my mind now on this.
Yeah, I don't want to just be preaching. I want you to sort of haul me in if I'm going too far or whatever.
And he's declaring all foods clean in that. So I suppose if I were a Christian, I'd be saying, well, this is about overemphasis on rituals rather than behavior. I mean, I suppose, trying to play devil's advocate a bit, that I would say that excessive reliance on rituals or focus on rituals gets away from what's really important rather than looking, so it's the sort of moral aspect rather than the scientific, physical aspect of things that Jesus is talking about there.
And you said how he's saying all foods are clean, which is there in the passage. Mark says
I've got the
aside.
passage. Yes, I've got the passage.
Yeah, notice it's an aside though, and some people point out that that's the author, not Jesus. That's the author. Yeah. That's an interpretation from the author, maybe, of if he's thinking Jesus said this.
Yeah.
But the author was the Holy Spirit, so same person.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So historical sense, it's the author, physical, but yes, the Holy Spirit is saying this. In that case, you might as well just have Jesus say it.
Yes.
And in saying this, I mean all things are clean. Rather than an aside, Holy Spirit inspired aside. How about that?
That is a sort of practical matter.
Yeah.
If you're a good Christian following the passage and you've read it and everything, you say, "Oh, okay, I'm now going to, when I next go to Sainsbury's, have pork and bacon on the shopping list, which I wouldn't have done otherwise." So that is a practical outworking of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yet somehow the practical aspect of this we've got to ignore, and it's all a spiritual passage.
Yes. And
isn't it a modern distinction anyway to say, the religion's all about spiritual things and not at all about practical things? That's not a very Hebrew, certainly not a very Hebrew way of viewing religion. So At the very worst, this is, as I say, playing with fire. I'm sorry, the very best, I mean.
Yeah,
You're saying he's playing with fire. He's just asking for people to get the wrong end of the stick and to stop washing their hands before meals because of that. It isn't considered important at all. What you eat will just pass straight through you. It's not a matter at all if you've got dirty hands.
If your hands are particularly dirty, it'll pass straight through you particularly quickly as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting detailed look at this. When you have a particular theme in mind of like cleanliness, and you suddenly see different parts of the Bible you've never really taken on before. It's interesting.
And it does seem to say, look, if you're all up your bottom, as it were, about washing your hands before meals, that is going against the commands of God.
Yes, yeah, I could see that that's perhaps not helpful. Anyway, put it that way.
Yeah. So I guess if we move on a bit, then we've got the Quran comes and goes, as it were. And so this isn't a thing about Judaism or Christianity. It's a sort of any revealed religion will have this problem unless it's got some practical advice that you could see an omniscient God would put in there for you. I mean, imagine it if there really was a hand washing with soap or something in there before meals there in the Old Testament, and we didn't realize until 150 years ago why it was there. That would be amazing.
That'd be quite a result, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
For the theists. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on in history, and eventually we've got the term germ theory of disease, and we understand the importance of hand washing. And then you've got charities. I'm talking about Christian ones now, like World Vision is like an American one, and Tear Fund is the British one, the kind of evangelical. Actually, Tear Fund stands for TEAR, the Evangelical Alliance Relief Fund. That's what Tear Fund comes from, and they're very well respected, good charity doing health and hygiene and clean water and giving people advice on hand washing. That's all kind of the nuts and bolts of what they do. So can we all agree now, Christians and not, that it really is a good idea to do hand washing? And so we must think that God thinks it's a good idea as well. So when kind of Christians are doing their thing about God's mysterious ways, surely his mysterious ways aren't that he thinks it's actually a bad idea for humans to know about hand washing. All these Christians, well, everyone agrees that it's a good idea for us to know about hand washing and hygiene. The mysterious ways seem to be that it's a bad idea that God should tell us. And we have to find out for ourselves millennia and millennia and millennia after not only has he given the law and visited Earth and everything, still nearly 2 millennia, and eventually we get there.
Well, as ever, yes. It's sort of pretty much what you would expect if people were just trying to figure stuff out for themselves, and there was no external, omniscient, disembodied being helping them to get there. They just had to make their own way there.
Yeah. Okay, so in preparing for this, I thought I'd do a Facebook post in the Facebook Unbelievable group, which I think Francis and I for sure would recommend.
I would, yes.
It's a private group, but you get let in very easily by the moderators.
Of whom Ed and I are two. Yeah. And my top tip for anyone who wants to join the Unbelievable Facebook group is answer all the questions. We do look to see whether you've answered the questions, all of them. And if you haven't answered all of them, you won't get in. But if you answer all of them,
you'll be extremely welcome.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll in the show notes I'll put a link to this particular Facebook group from a few months ago when I was working all this out, and I got H from A to H as I kind of listed the kind of things people coming back. So I'll sort of begin to go down that list. So the first thing I was told was that in raising this issue, that I'm telling God what he ought to do, sort of like judging his morals, which is, of course, not my place particularly as a miserable atheist. So what do you make of that?
Well, not. I don't think. Well, I think the moral argument is always weak. So there's always an assumption that if you're an atheist, you can't believe in objective morality. And I'm an atheist, and I do think that morality is objective. So, I mean, just the fact that it's assumed is always a bit of an irritation to me. But if you are a theist, then you will yourself believe in objective morality. So it's not whether God meets my standards of objective morality. You as a theist have your own standards, and is God meeting them? I mean, it's a problem that has to be answered, and it would still have to be answered even if there were no atheists in the world. That inconsistency between a loving, good God and the lack of good guidance on something that's going to promote human welfare is always going to be a query, whether it's raised by atheists or not.
Yeah. And especially as it's children who are in the firing line more than, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the same. It's like it's not going to match up, is it, with the verses I read earlier about God actually bringing the sicknesses and the boils and everything else as a judgment. A lot of people with their own moral, even Christian people, have problems with that picture of God. Very much so. It's very difficult to be, with their own morality somehow that's there from whatever reason, even if it's from one aspect of God, it's actually causing another problem with, well, I read this and that doesn't seem like the God who is good that I think I know. So I think all of that, as Francis was talking about, your own morality needs to be checked out to whether the God that is there is actually that God. Is that the sort of thing you meant, Francis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I meant that it's a valid question, whoever is asking it. Whether the person asking it is an atheist or a theist, the question remains equally valid. And so by coming back and saying, oh, well, where's your standard for morality is basically an ad hominem argument, which is you're not looking at the issues, you're looking at the personal qualities of the person who's asking the question, and that's basically irrelevant.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go on to number 2 or B. And I remember being teased on this by some of my interlocutors.
Yes, interlocutors.
Yep. That saying, I'm asking God to give us sort of practical advice, and so how small a practical advice should he ignore before I stop criticizing him? So do you want how to sew a button on or something? I can't remember the examples given. So you can imagine, if every bit of practicality is put in there, then it will just get swamped. And so and then how do I say, okay, well, this bit of practical advice is missing, it matters, but that bit of practical advice is missing and that doesn't matter, and that would be fine. How do I make the distinction between the two? So I think this is a more substantial response.
Yeah, I guess. I think that takes us back to this whole thing about, looking at the boil. Has it got white hair in it? Has it got a black hair in it? Is it red? I mean, that's practical advice. So it wasn't like God is presented as being entirely averse to giving practical advice. It's just that the practical advice wasn't fantastically good.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like he's doing his best and his time.
Yes, that's right. And his best turns out not to be much better than
Yes.
we could have come up with left to our own devices, given the state of knowledge at that time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's like the old quip when the atheist debates talk about the flood and flooding everybody and drowning all the babies and all the human beings. I think it's Pine Creek that says that. Do you know, he could have just put them in a coma and just, do you know what I mean? Like doing it in a way in which, that's right. Yeah, why have all the screaming and crying, falling off rocks, and just why not just zap them out in a second without going through that process of drowning? And so again, that's putting on saying it's a view that if there was a God that I thought was there, he wouldn't be doing it like that. I suppose it sounds judgmental on God, and you've mentioned this, haven't you, Ed? Is it us puny humans questioning God? But I think at those points you kind of do.
Well, we have to. If God doesn't, if we don't know in advance that God exists or not, then all we've got to go on is this presentation of God given to us by his followers. Yes, and then because we're in the 21st century, we're already inheriting different assumptions about reality than perhaps back then, and so you're going to have a clash simply because it was revealed back then. Now, if it was revealed now, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? If it all started now and Jesus came, and then there was some New Testament written right now, it'd be fascinating to know what would be written, wouldn't it? Fascinating. It'd be great. It'd be a great YouTube channel.
Yes, exactly.
I think on this, I taught my children to be really careful crossing the road.
Right.
And I didn't teach them the details of some practical stuff that would only have a minor impact on their lives. So I just didn't even mention it. So it's not difficult for God to put in the really important stuff, like hand washing, and leave out the weird stuff like the white and the black hairs growing out of boils.
Yeah.
There's plenty of room for the key message. And in fact, you probably get diluted if you put too much in. Okay, so let's go on to number C, as it were, letter C. God gave us brains to work out hygiene. So it is God. God does get the credit after all, because he gave us the brains to do it. Come on, folks.
Kind of it stumps.
Sorry. Well, no, I'm just he gave us the brains to work out hygiene. Well, why did he give us any advice then? I mean,
that's a good one.
Giving us any advice because he gave us brains.
And but those brains have taken centuries and centuries and centuries of deaths to finally crack things like only 150 years ago. With it. So the brains didn't necessarily work for generation after generation after generation.
They weren't really good brains, were they?
No. So
I mean, I suppose. Sorry.
It is, isn't it? I mean, again, it's back to the same context of the God who's made us with these brains. It's still a warfare culture back then in the descriptions and fighting and armies and killings. And so I'm just wondering what the brains were meant to do. Plus the fact that if you take theology, you were meant to be in New Testament anyway, you're meant to be darkened in your mind and brain and can't see and blind and stuff. So you need help, even in
I mean, I suppose it's like your example, Ed, of you taught your children to do this. You knew what was really important to help them, and you didn't just say, well, you've got brains. Figure it out for yourself. I may lose some of my children along the way, but there we are.
You saw your older sister getting run over by a truck.
Yes. That's.
But
that's
the Bible has normally been seen to be a moral handbook and guidebook, isn't it? Because we can't get to our moral understandings ourselves. Everyone goes back to the book. Homosexuality is wrong because it's not. I might, to be honest, I would love it to be okay, but it says in the book, So you're following a blindness to the book rather than our own minds. So that argument doesn't work, because if we did follow our own minds, we'd have a lot more problems with a lot of stuff. As Christians, I mean. Christians are often trying to push you back to, will you believe in hell as eternal suffering? Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't. I don't blame me. It's God who said that. I just have to go by the word of God, And so our minds are often pushed to the side anyway in theology. If you start using your mind, you tend to become liberal Christians, and then eventually not.
I think plenty of people stick at the liberal end and then go further.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, most of my friends are stuck at the liberal end. I'm looking up from the.
They're doing great there. Like,
cliff bottom. That's right. Steve. Exactly. Yeah. But you do become like that because you use your mind a little bit more than the other side, which actually doesn't tell you not to use your mind, but it's like, isn't there a phrase in the Bible as well? It's like reason that passes all understanding.
Yeah,
what's that passage? I'll give. It's almost like a nice way to say, don't trust in your mind. I need to get that verse.
Well, there's a verse saying, "Love the Lord with all your mind and heart and everything."
Yeah, no, I think it's like
which I think
something passes all understanding.
Yes. Yes.
Whatever that passage is.
Are you sure that's not from the prayer book?
Heard of the peace of God that passes all understanding?
Yes, it might be that
phrase that's coming to mind.
In other words, and again, you want something to pass understanding seems to be a quick route out of something of our thinking processes.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just a thought I had.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Number D, letter D. Morality leading to heaven is what cares about. What God cares about. Not all this stuff.
Right. Okay.
So it's all about going to heaven or not.
Right. Okay. Well, that's certainly not a Hebrew thought.
No.
At all. So
No.
I mean, they didn't really have a concept of going to heaven, and so anything to do in the Old Testament has got nothing to do with that particular point, I would say.
And
people like N.T. Wright are very scathing of that view.
Oh, right. I was going to say that I may be trespassing on areas that are very much outside my knowledge by going into Christian dogma, but I thought morality didn't lead to heaven. I thought only Jesus led to heaven.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, you
so
can't
maybe
do it yourself.
Maybe I'm misquoting the Christians who were going at me on this.
I mean, it's true, isn't it? You can't do it yourself. That's the standard take, isn't it? It's like you can't make, it's whatever you do, you might get a little way up the mountain or just you trip over at the bottom, but only Jesus, so you basically admit defeat on that.
Yeah.
And I suppose, well, anyway, I mean, it comes back to the idea that if God loves us, you would expect to see him care about our welfare in this life. And part of that would be giving us good guidance on how to keep ourselves well and healthy.
Yeah. And healing is a thing in the New Testament, even if not in all branches of Christianity today. And so, it's great. It's considered wonderful when a child is raised from the dead or a child is healed.
Yeah.
So why not a child saved from getting ill in the first place through the community or washing their hands before meals? Okay. E. Perhaps God did tell us about hand washing, like he told Adam and Eve, maybe, but then it's all got lost. So kind of like it's our fault. That was really said.
Okay. Well, he could have told us again, couldn't he?
Yes.
And even telling you with it, all through history. Just keep giving the message, if there's any communication really going on,
once Adam and Eve had gone, he could have said, "Oh, something your parents didn't tell you. It's quite important."
Yeah.
Or
even with the virus, just say for argument's sake, the whole pandemic that just happened. If God is aware of everything, even as an open theist of everything that's actually currently happening, he could see that. Say it did come out of that. It was a leak. He could speak to some Christians in that area and say, "I'm telling you now that there's a virus in this place. I want you to go to the government and say, get people talking and looking into it." God could do so much with his knowledge, if you think about it. Just as a matter of principle, on anything, any moment, all the time, where people have been killed and buried, you wouldn't have months of looking for them. I used to think this as a teenager, hang around. God knows where the murderer put that person and who did it. So why doesn't he tell one of us, or just communicate somehow and get these people found? It doesn't happen. The world does not operate like that. And God doesn't seem to. So,
Well, actually, this is quite a good analogy. That you imagine a government, there's a pandemic going, It's been worked out that it's all about sharing rooms and people breathing on each other, and that's how it spreads. And imagine the government not telling anybody about that, just looking at the research reports and sort of filing them away.
That's a bit like, actually, that's very good.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Which some people feel the government has done in certain ways, that they know something because of sort of corruption and power. Don't let the people know, all the conspiracies today now might have various things like that. They know a lot more than they're telling us. So that's withholding the ability, So I think it's obvious, really.
Yeah. Okay, here's the classic one. F. Right. God withdrew protection at the fall.
Well, I mean we've talked about this before. So he withdrew. They took some kind of, or broke, it depends how I literally look at it, but they did something, and suddenly deep sea creatures start to eat each other, It's argued, you think, what the heck is it linked to? Maybe volcanoes started in some of these views, and tsunamis, and so God's withdrawal. I mean, wouldn't either of you say that God's withdrawal, if it did do all of that, is actually a form of almost positive stuff? It's not just, you can use the language of withdrawal, but isn't that him doing something?
Yeah, he did. Yes.
It would be.
He got annoyed at the meeting the fruit, and he's sort of saying, right, I'm going to slap you with smite you with this and the other. I'm just going to leave you and all your descendants.
Yeah. I mean, you could kill somebody in a hospital, but you could also pull the button off the life support. Just switch it off. So you're both doing something. One is sort of like turning something off, and one is physically hitting you, So, I mean, isn't it a bit like that? If God pulls out because of someone has done something, he's done everything that happens in this rotten world is all because he pulled the plug because of his decision to pull the plug.
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, I'm not very good at understanding Christian theology on the fall, but wouldn't they say that everything broke at the point of the fall? Just everything that had been perfect, just, so there were bacteria, but the bacteria weren't ever going to hurt us because everything was perfect. In the same way that there were lions and there were lambs, but the lion was never going to eat the lamb. And it was only when everything fell apart due to the fall that you got this, it was all just bad consequences from the fall.
Presumably comets and meteors would just miss the planet or not even come at all.
Perhaps, they probably just give us a light show without
that's right.
actually doing any damage, so I would imagine.
If at all they were coming through space at all, So, I mean, you have to go bigger than just the Earth, don't you, for this sort of thing. But the moon has been battered. So did it start because he pulled the plug? I mean, it goes on and on. This thought.
But I suppose if your answer to it is that God withdrew protection, then you could come back with one of the earlier defenses, which is, God gave us brains so we could work out our own protection.
Yeah.
He missed a trick there, didn't he? Didn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
Checkmate, God.
Well, you mean that I'm going to pull my protection for you, but use your brains to make your own? Is that what you mean?
That's right. God withdrew protection. But in the end, we kept plugging away at it and we beat God at his own game.
Which means that God then throughout church history is in fact withdrawing, not giving. So maybe that would explain why it's not all in the Bible, because he's not giving because of his removing. Do you see what I mean? It's like he'd be going against himself. If he has withdrawn since the fall, then why would he be counteracting that by giving you really good information to get health information?
Yeah, but he didn't. He tripped himself up, didn't he?
Yeah,
he was hoist with his own petard when he gave us brains.
Yes.
And then we were able to do our own protection. Thank you, God.
Thank you.
Just do it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, what this is saying is this mysterious, God's mysterious ways, actually his mysterious ways are that he wants us to get clobbered. He's withdrawn protection. That's his will, his wishes.
Yeah.
And we haven't realized that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of passages even throughout history anyway in the Bible of God. Like I said, I read one earlier, you follow and obey, you won't get sick. And if you don't, you will. So he's doing the withdrawal anyway. So yeah, it was just the point of withdrawing is actually a very strong act, actually.
Yeah.
I suppose it's like the war thing today, isn't it? Pulling out of Afghanistan is like withdrawing, but actually it's simply going to make potential chaos if you're that way politically seeing that. And so you hang around, we've just withdrawn. Yeah, but that's actually made it like some of these situations awfully worse. Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. And God made the world a dangerous place if he wasn't protecting us. That's what the implications of that is. God chose to make the world a really dangerous place, and us to require the protection of being in the Garden of Eden or something to
so it's
live
like
in it.
it's already default bad.
Yeah.
Unless he's making moves to sort of keep you within a bad place.
Yeah.
So
the dangers that he's protecting us from are things he's made.
Yes. It's like giving you a lovely protective house in the storm, but actually he's made the storm.
Yeah.
And
then he takes the house away.
Then he takes the house away. That's right. So it still comes back to the storms. Otherwise, well, mind you, Pentecostals don't do that. They put all the bad to the devil, but that's another big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you
so
do
it's
that,
the devil's fault that God omitted hand washing in the Bible.
That's right. So then the devil is then doing this, and then of course the big question is then how did you sustain the devil, make the devil, keep him going if you're God? And so the questions go back and back. Even if the devil was responsible for all the so-called negative, and only God for the positive, you've still got. Hey, hang around. This devil is in existence because of God, continually. I mean, he could have been snapped out as soon as he stepped wrong. Yeah, all these questions keep coming.
Okay, and then the ultimate one, you could tell they're getting a bit desperate by now. God has the right to do as he wishes.
Oh, wow. The might is right one.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Romans 9. I always come back to that.
Who are you, oh man? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But you might say, isn't God unjust in this? And Paul says exactly that. Who are you? Or as you put it, Andrew, shut up and sit down.
Yes, for the Trinity. Shut up and just sit down. I don't understand it. All the gobbledygook talk means that. Yeah, I suppose it does. That's a bit like that, isn't it? It's like, were you there? Do you know how it operates? So I can do what I want. Might is right. But that comes back to that.
Is that Job 38 or Ken Ham you're talking about?
Well, it's both. Job 38 was, were you there? And Ken Ham says that about, we know someone who was there at the beginning, so we know that the world was made 6,000 years ago. That's what Ken Ham would say.
Yeah.
But Francis, what do you think on that then? The might is right.
I don't think much of it. God has the right. Well, has he? I don't know. I mean, who writes something that are conveyed by other systems? I mean, say God has a right to do something suggests that there is something that theists don't like, which is that there is a measure under which he acquires a right. But if you're going to say that God can do just whatever he wants because he's got powers, yes, but then what he wants is arbitrary, it's God would have the right to, well, I was going to say to torture babies, but apparently he does have the right to torture babies, according to some people who think that that babies go to hell because they haven't accepted Jesus. So I mean, it's a bit difficult to argue with someone who will follow through the logic of their position to that point that they could never criticize anything that God did. And ultimately, go ahead.
I tend to concede that God does have the right to do as he wishes, but then say, well, you can't call God good then.
Well, I think that was kind of what I was getting to, perhaps in my rather tedious and roundabout way. That was what I was trying to get to. That if you're going to say that, then God is just like this, a mafia boss or an Eastern potentate. Yeah, you can't argue with them, but you can't morally admire them either.
Yeah. It's just not the God that you're saying you believe in.
Yeah.
And of course, even if you did, there's some consistent people are like that, and you can find them. And I don't think they're going to get a hearing anywhere within many Christian circles, let alone non-Christian, to talk like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Otherwise you might as well, you just go the whole hog, everything you read. Yep. God is like that. Yep. He does that. Yep. He'll give you that,
Okay. So the last objection I got is probably the best, and it got me doing my further research. And that is that soap and clean water were not available at the time. So how could God give that advice?
Really? That was the thing. How about giving instructions to invent it?
Well, here you go. Actually, it was already invented.
Well, yes, it'd be way before, yeah.
Yeah. So I had a look on the hand-washing page in Wikipedia, for example. And apparently goes right back for 2,800 BC. So that's 2,000 years before this was written. The Old Testament law was written, according to your...
Yeah, and then that would be an early form of it. So...
yes, very...
Yeah.
So that Wikipedia page said a formula for making soap was written on a Sumerian clay tablet around 2,500 BC. The soap was produced by heating a mixture of oil and wood ash.
Wow. So that would just show you there's someone to say, see, it's in the Bible, like that clip. Say something like this. Isn't it wonderful? Yeah. God's put soap in the Bible. Just say it was.
Well, soap is in the Bible. It's mentioned in Job.
Yeah.
And in Jeremiah and in Malachi.
But then you say, therefore, then they got it all from the Sumerians. So you could argue that, or maybe someone might. But it's actually,
But washing your hands in water, clean or soapy, before a meal isn't there. But
soap was. Which shows you the Sumerians might have been using their brain a little bit more than the writers of the Old Testament.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sumerians, I don't know if they were washing their hands before meals or not, but they had soap for clothes and other things for you got uses for soap.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. There's evidence that people in the time that they wrote the Old Testament, that they still think the world was flat when the Greeks had already discovered it was spherical. And so, that means that Hebrew people with Yahweh weren't doing so well as other people without Yahweh.
Yeah. And I did find that there is an advantage in hand washing even without soap. Soap really helps, but it's not absolutely necessary to get some health benefits from hand washing before meals. And apparently you can even just use ash. And that's the World Health Organization recommended ash or sand as an alternative to soap when soap is not available. Use of ash is common in rural areas and developing countries and has, in experiments, been shown at least as effective as soap for removing pathogens.
Oh, wow.
This is a quote from the Wikipedia page on hand washing.
Yep.
But it does qualify that a bit, saying that it's of poor quality, the research that they're using there. But, that's the best they can say.
Well, we've given more practical advice now on this podcast than God gave in the whole of the Bible.
Probably. Yeah, I'd say so.
Thanks.
Or at least food for thought. So on this.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's worthy of a 50th episode.
Oh yes, it's well.
Oh, definitely, yes. To do a most unusual episode subject on the 50th actually kind of has a good ring to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So
we'll
I'll
clean
wash my
up
hands
with this
episode.
one.
Yeah. They all come out now. Yeah.
They'll come out in the wash.
Yeah. That's right. And now we're rapidly trying to think of the clean jokes. Oh dear. Yeah. These are unclean jokes. And actually, I was going to mention a point of that sometimes the Old Testament things to talk about, say, uncleanliness, is obviously seen by a lot of scholars really to be not to do with morality, but it's taking some literal things about being dirty and clean, but making it almost like a ceremonial thing that's outside of morality. So even the word an abomination we tend to have seen that as moral and evil, as opposed to this is, there is debate over this, but there's the idea of being unclean isn't it's a bit like today. We would, if you say to your child, go down and wash, you're dirty. And if you don't wash, you'll still be dirty in dinner time. You're not making a moral comment on how bad that child is. You're just saying you're not clean, for the meal. And so to extrapolate that out, and a lot of the uncleanliness in the Old Testament is really just segregated to the Jewish people to be different, maybe from other people to make these points. 7 days because of the period, or some sort of other thing that you were talking about, Ed. So I think it's easy to say these are incredibly morally bad things when they're just instructions of ceremony, and there's a distinction there. So that's one argument people make. Okay, so that was a 50th, and so celebrate that. And 51st, we'll be coming back in 51st in a month's time with a brand new subject of interest and fascination. So look forward to doing that and releasing that in a month's time from now. So until next time, I have been Andrew, your host.
And I've been Frances.
And I've been Ed.